A lot of people think in the UK that there's never, ever, ever been a revolution. You couldn't be more wrong. There have been lots of revolutions here in the UK. We just call them different names, War of the Roses, technically a revolution. Again, drummed up nicely as the War of the Roses. The English Civil War, again, technically a revolution. Indeed, in the English Civil War itself, towards the end, there was potentially another a revolution brewing within the soldiers of the new model army, but Oliver Cromwell managed to somewhat take the wind out of their sails, and thus it never happened. There is the Glorious Revolution, or otherwise known by the Dutch as the invasion of the UK. Of course, and of course, one man's invasion is another man's glorious revolution. So there's very much this thing of, in the UK, we don't do revolutions. When we do, there are hundreds of examples. You could point out to in UK history and say, well, that definitely is it looks like a revolution, acted like a revolution, but it wasn't a revolution. And of course, it is very, very right to say that Brexit itself was very much a revolution pushed by a very small subsection of people who have, again, just like any revolution, had its radicals on one side, and they've now taken power only to find themselves being eaten by their own project, much like Robespierre was very much eaten by his very own revolution. So today we're going to go diving into what's been happening with, shall we say, the children of Brexit, and find out what's been happening to them, because again, their own project is now very much starting to, well, eat them alive. But before we do that, please do remember to have a look at that like, to click that like, hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, there are the YouTube subscriptions open as well. And as always, thank you very much to all the people who do support the channel that way. So this comes from The Guardian with the title of "All Revolutions Devour Their Own Children. Just look at the Brexiteers." As the Observer goes to press on Christmas Day, the UK's ruling Conservatives are contemplating breaking the back of the National Health Service. Maybe they are right to avoid taking all but the most cautionary precautions against Omicron. Perhaps even the relative mildness of the new variant will outweigh the wild infectiousness. The fact remains that, although they want the crisis to be over, they have no idea if it is over. And on this speculative hope, Conservative MPs are prepared to run the potentially fatal political risk of collapsing the NHS. So much attention is focusing on Boris Johnson's unfitness to be Prime Minister, that the disillusion of the Parliamentary Conservative Party into now warring bands of ideologues and fanatics is in danger of being lost. The contempt for rules is the willingness to gamble away its changes by holding power and to show of movement in a grip of a radical right-wing delusion. We've talked about this before, about how the Conservative Party has split, and it's very often the story that journalists don't cover, that there's been this split along these fanatics and ideologues. It's quite interesting, but we've talked about that before. So contrary to, obviously, to much of the political commentary, the Conservatives have not reinvented themselves to advance the interests of their new working class voters. The aristocratic disdain of a Downing Street that partied while forcing the country to lock down shows how widely the values of the Tory elite and the average voter have diverged. A supposed truth about politics is that while many have been defined within the technocratic title of May's law of collinear disparity, holds that the professional politicians at the top of the party cannot afford to be as so extreme as the activists below them. Members are free to indulge their whims. Serious politicians must hug the electorate close if there any hope to retain power. All attempts to try and create laws as certain as laws of the physics to try and predict human behavior fail. And the state of the Conservative Party shows that May's law is no exception. A study for the UK in a Changing Europe think tank found that the Conservative MPs were most lost in the right-wing ideology than actually Conservative members. Conservative voters and natural electorate as a whole, almost a quarter of the Conservative members and 73% of the public agreed that there was one law for the rich and another for the poor, as Johnson's career has indeed shown. And just 5% of the Conservative MPs and the authors surveyed believed it. Large majorities throughout that big business takes advantage of the public and that the ordinary people do not get a fair share of the nation's wealth. Conservative politicians did not. Again, we've talked about this before, about how the electorate is saying one thing while the Conservatives are saying another thing completely different to what the electorate actually want. And we've said this before, the public overwhelmingly want progressive policies. The right-wing doctrine that they cling to is not a coherent system of thought. I find the best way to understand this is a very truculent and overconfidence. Like angry children, the Conservatives demand that the world be as they want it to be, not as it is. They do not realize that they have caught themselves in a very feedback loop. The nationalism and factionalism that once brought them electoral success are the very things threatening to destroy the values they think that they uphold. Read the Tory press and you cannot miss the laments of the failure to try and turn the UK into a capitalist powerhouse. Lord Frost walks out of the cabinet saying that Brexit should have brought a lightly regulated, low-tax country. Liz Truss positions herself to try and benefit from Johnson's downfall by posing as that free trade fundamentalist who will unchain Britannia from the shackles of the state. They cannot admit that Brexit was an attack on wealth creation. The Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that it will cause twice the long-term economic damage of COVID, with the Leave Now trade 15% lower, bringing in a 100 billion annual hit to the national income at a cost of 40 billion to the lost tax revenue. When you shrink the tax base, you have to raise taxes to cover the shortfall just to stand still. When you shrink the private sector, the size of the state grows in comparison by definition. When you pull your country out of the largest free trade area in the world, you have no right to protest about economic decline. The most fast break things. That may work as a slogan in Silicon Valley, but it isn't a program for government. The creative destruction the Conservatives thought they were unleashing with Brexit has created nothing of value and only left rubble behind it. Their behavior shows that at some level they can actually grasp the magnitude of their failure. All revolutions eventually devour their own children, as the euphoria of the initial uprising degenerates into panic. The speed at which the Brexit revolutionaries are now devouring theirs is best indication of the depth of their insecurity. They don't have the table manners to try and wait until the kids are out of the nappies before sharpening their knives. Johnson won the Brexit referendum and the 2019 election. Now the right cannot wait to be rid of him. With a roar of "enough is enough," Steve Baker bans Nadine Dorries from the Conservative WhatsApp group for the crime of praising the Prime Minister. Her work in obviously undermining the BBC counts for nothing. And in Conservative culture, as in all cancel cultures, you must show a very demeaning adherence to the ideological line or you are finished. When Johnson made Sajid Javid the health secretary in June, the Tory press hailed him as a COVID hawk who would resist any attempt to lockdown on the economy. This month's fears about the Omicron variant have compelled him to introduce very modest restrictions, and Conservative MPs did not say that if Javid believed that there was danger ahead, they should take notice. They heckled him in the Commons and made the case for caution with cries of "resign" and "what a load of old tripe." Instead of taking him at face value, they are painting him now as the enemy. Labour's health spokesman, Wes Streeling, told me in a voice filled with disbelief, "I thought there was a hint of anticipation as well." Every senior opposition figure I talk to believes the Conservatives are no longer capable of governing themselves or the country. They've devolved into an extremist rabble of coherent these cavorted by magical thinking, heresy hunts, and fits of temper and doctoral spasms. If the opposition parties cooperate and if Labour can actually break with the calamity of the Corbyn years, then there is very little chance that they can eject. There is very good chance that they can eject this government from power. A faint chance, I grant you, but given the scale of the Tories' electoral advantage, but a chance nevertheless. And of course, with that uncharacteristically cheerily thought, I wish you a very Merry Christmas. So there is a lot, obviously, to be going along and how this evolves and shapes, especially in the coming year. I've said before, oh dear me, you need to watch Liz Truss, you need to watch Rishi Sunak, definitely. But who to say what will happen in the next couple of months? Especially, of course, with the recovery of all this and how they're going to say this recovery is going to work, because there will need to be an economic package. Every other country, in fact, Europe alone, if you look at the European countries, all have packages ready even before the site was in hit of this is going to be our economic recovery package for COVID. Even the EU's prepared funds and such for this. We haven't, because our government is obsessed with short-termism. They are obsessed with short-term wins and do not look beyond the next 3 to 6 months to see how those wins might be effective or what might the consequences actually be of their actions. But of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit that like, share, subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.